All right, Lee, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
No problem, AJ. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, of course. So, as I had sent over into the email, this is the, I believe, 20th video in a set of videos where our goal is to establish a question, that I've been asking guys for years, right? What's the difference? Whether that's mini tour guys, high-level amateurs, what's the difference between, maybe those who improve and those who don't, and then ultimately those who make it to the highest level and those who don't. So kind of as we're getting started here, I wanted to get just a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, maybe sort of some of the players that you work with, and then kind of go from there.
Okay, well, yeah, very, very quickly. I first touched a golf club on my 16th birthday, and then rapidly got pretty quick because I went for lessons off the local pro. I got a scholarship at UNC Charlotte. I was actually offered a few. I went there. This is in the early 90s, which kind of got me into being inquisitive about the psychology of the game, because from a movement point of view, I moved really nicely. I was never really long, but technically I was quite strong, especially with the full swing and the putting. But my home golf course, which was Haydock Park Golf Course, was only like 6,000 yards, quite short. And then all of a sudden, I'm at UNC Charlotte, and we're competing on these 7,200 yard golf courses, which were huge. But there's water everywhere. There's absolute forests either side. It was fantastic. Loved it. But I didn't have all of the years of experience that all of my teammates had. And I asked to see a sports psychologist because I knew that I was thinking, I was in avoidance, don't hit it there, don't hit it there. All the classic, some of the classic stuff that most golfers experience, well, every golfer, So that's when I started reading about kind of high performance psychology stuff. And back in the early 90s, there wasn't a lot. They were all quite thick. A lot of them were kind of business books, or there was certainly hardly anything to do with golf or sport back then. But I found that I enjoyed reading them, and I could easily transfer the information and help the other guys on the golf team. And I got a real buzz out of it, and I'm still in contact with some of the guys now, and I meet up with them every now and then. If I'm at a PGA Tour event and they're local, they'll come along. So then from that, after 1 year, I thought, I'm not gonna be a golfer. I got sick of getting stuffed by David Duval and Stuart Sink, who were at Georgia Tech every single time I went out and played. That, like, not just beating me by a couple, but plenty. I knew I wasn't going to be a tournament player. So I came home, went to Liverpool, just down the road from me, my parents' home city, to go to university, do sports science and psychology. And then just started working with golfers, really, because obviously I was a decent player in the local area. So people knew me, they knew that I was what I was studying, and they'd go kind of, right, come on, Lee, psychology me. So I actually had a load of really good guinea pigs locally to start practicing on, if you like, and then it just escalated, to be honest. My goal was never to be traveling the world doing what I do now, with tour players on DP and PGA Tour. It was just to help people enjoy the game more, because I saw a lot of frustration. Obviously we still see a lot of frustration, and that was my original goal, was to help players enjoy the game of golf more, but it just kind of built and built and built, and yeah, here we are now, a bunch of tour winners, and some great clients. Just really enjoy working with the guys that I work with and have worked with over the years. I think my first European Tour range pass was 2006, so I've been doing it quite a while.
I think it's so interesting hearing stories like yours. I feel like so much of the most quote unquote successful people, like, you hear it a lot. Like, it was never my goal to do XYZ. It just sort of happened because you kind of focus on the process. Like, there's even some professional golfers that you hear like that, and I think it's really interesting when I hear stories like that, because I think so much of what is maybe perpetuated in the media is like, you have to set a goal and you have to think this and you have to think through that, and you're just sort of like, No, man, I was just trying to focus on the process. I think it's really interesting to hear that about your story.
Yeah, yeah, and it was absolutely true. I was just driven to help players enjoy the game more and be less frustrated. Then, obviously, the more you work with players, the word gets around, and then it just gradually better players locally and internationally start hearing about you, and then you end up next minute you're traveling around to European tour events, and you're having a little bit of success early on. People like what you're saying, and then I forget what year it was. Brandon Grace went and won 4 times in a year in Europe in a breakthrough. And I'd worked with him for about 2 years before that, and he was like on the European tour. Well, he was on the Challenge Tour, which is like the Corn Ferry, and then he graduated from that, got onto the European tour, then fell away, and then came back on, and then just went ballistic. He was like the breakthrough for me, if you like, in that sphere. And then obviously when you have success with players like that, then all the other players start kind of looking around, going, "Oh, okay, what's going on here?"
So if we were to take someone like Brandon as sort of a case study, and obviously you can't get into probably super specific details, but I mean, what do you think the difference is, right? Like, that's kind of the point of the show is you have the French player who maybe is sort of back and forth, and then they just break through, and then they just go ballistic. Like, surely his physical skills improved a lot, but like, I can't imagine it's dramatically. Is it practicing better? Is it thinking better? Is it all the above? Like, what for him in particular, maybe a little bit of what it was.
I think with someone like Brandon, he was one of those guys in South Africa who came through really strong. Everyone was kind of going, "Oh, he's the next big thing. He's the next big thing." I met him at a Challenge Tour event because I was caddying. I was actually asked to caddy for one of my other clients who was playing on the Challenge Tour, and they ended up playing together, and we just chatted. You could see that he was a good player. You could see that he was slightly different to the other players playing, most of the players in that Challenge Tour event. I think managing expectations with someone like that is quite big, because when the South African media put them on a pedestal, there's that inbuilt pressure, and we start kind of sneaking more towards the outcome and the result, and why am I not achieving, and those kind of things. We did a lot with his putting. He still has a little bit of a funky putting stroke, but so a lot of it was based around the way that he focused his mind on his putting, and also the way that he was practicing his putting. I'm a big believer in really good, strong practice drills where there's always a challenge, and there's always something to achieve and something to strive for. Now, what we did was, over time, we kept going on with those, and then when on his breakthrough year, I think there was a change in mindset. There was definitely a change in mindset. I think he felt like he belonged, because out on the European tour, and his first win was in South Africa, which always helps. A lot of the SA guys, their first wins are in SA. And then the week after, it was the Joburg Open, and then the week after, he played in the Tournament of Champions and beat 2 of his heroes in a playoff, Ernie Els and Ritty Furson, which was just incredible. And they actually zoomed in on his putting stroke in the playoff, and it was that little loop thing. But we were working on not thinking about the actual technicalities and the movement, and more about what the golf ball wanted to, what he wanted to do with the golf ball, and he rolled the putting in the playoff, and but it was definitely a settling of environment, and he obviously went on to win a couple more times. But I think the big thing with him was he just got more settled in his environment, and I think that used to be a bigger thing. But now we're seeing, these young guys coming out of college or, internationals in Europe, and they're so much better prepped. I don't think, the really good ones, like the Brandon Graces, I don't think they take as much time to kind of adapt. Maybe because there's more kind of sports psychology around. I would definitely think that would be one of the key factors.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting to have seen the shift in that. So you mentioned some putting performance drills. If you have a favorite or two favorites, maybe you could mention kind of how that works for for the people at home to try.
Yeah, I know a few of the lads who I work with really like. I mean, it's not one of mine, but they will have hit around one hole. They'll hit 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 foot putts. So it's 5 putts in total, and then they'll do that around 4 different holes. So they'll hit 20 putts, and if they, the goal is to hold 15 or more. I think it's an old Luke Donald drill. The lads call it the Donald drill. So what that does, it focuses on the areas where you can really gain, which is I always believe is kind of within 10 or 12 feet, because outside of that, there's a bit of a big drop off in percentage of putts hold. So that those become quite important, more important, and you just constantly always going around, different breaks, different holes, so there's that variability, which is something that I like in practice as well. A lot of the putting coaches will as well. So, but there's an end goal, so having an end goal, having something to achieve. So with the tour players, it would be hole 15 out of 20, for example. For a club player, it might be hole 10 out of 20. You just build it around your own skill level, and then always try and improve that over time. And then a speed drill, I think, just a simple leapfrog drill is really good. Where you just have maybe a 15, 20 foot gap, and then 2 paces of T-pegs. So you start here, have about 20 feet, 1 T-peg, 2 paces, so about 6 feet, and then see how many balls consecutively you can get in before leaving one short. And if you get to kind of 6 or 7, then that's, you're starting to get quite good with your speed control. So again, you're always trying to beat your previous score, so there's that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where you need to lean into your process and look after your own personal system in order to create the result that you're looking for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's kind of what I'm finding with a lot of this in the better players and coaches that I speak to. Like, there's that element of progressive overload even in the performance games that they do. I think I'm someone maybe similar to you. Like, I swing it quite well physically, but I don't particularly have the skills that I need to have in terms of performance, right? Like, my scoring average last year was like 72.5 competitively, but you're getting dusted at the higher levels with that scoring average, right? And what I'm finding is, like, all last year in particular, like, I would just spend hours just like hitting balls, and it's like, what are you really doing there? And maybe you can talk about it a little bit from a ball striking perspective as well. But it kind of seems like performance drills and pushing to better yourself in those performance drills, maybe is a big part of what you do and what you guys do. Is that fairly accurate?
It's very accurate. Yeah. I mean, the challenge is, I think most people have an idea of some practice drills on the putting green or the chipping green, because it's a lot more controlled environment. Even with a lot of tour players, you put them on the range, I'll say, right, let's do a performance drill on the range, and they'll be like, well, how can I do that? Now, granted, a lot of the guys now have got the, like the TrackMan and those kind of things, and the flight scopes. And they can set up. I mean, it's amazing technology now. You can set up imaginary greens and different flag positions and all that kind of stuff. But not everyone's got a 20 grand, 25 grand TrackMan or access to one. So one of the first things I'll do when I get to a tournament is I'll look at the range. And so if you're somewhere like the Players, TPC, it's great. It's the most amazing range, where there's different greens set at different distances. But again, not everyone has that. But for example, at Sawgrass, what you would do is you pick 4 different greens and initially see how many shots it takes to hit each one of those greens. So it might take, first time, it might take 8 goes to hit each of the 4 greens, and then always have a driver kind of imaginary fairway there. Once they've kind of got a bit good at that, then you kind of crank it up a little bit and you go, right, you've got to hit those 4 greens consecutively and then hit the narrow driver target. But if you miss, then you've got to start again. So again, you're just turning the screw on them all of the time. Now, often, whenever I mention something like that to someone who's, maybe an amateur, like, well, I don't practice at Sawgrass, so, and I've not got all the range where I'm at is quite plain. So, but there's always something, it can be some imaginary greens in the distance, between that tree and that fence post, or something like that. If you could get 3 or 4 little targets like that, and then a driver target, brilliant. Have quite small targets depending on your skill level. If your stroke average is 72.5, you're gonna want those greens to be quite small, on the range. So initially, see how many it takes. If it takes 2 shots at each green, then you're getting around the correct skill level. But then with a little bit more practice, then we start to shift towards the hitting the 4 green targets, the iron targets, and then the driver target on the spin, so consecutively. Because what it does, people want to complete, they're called completion drills, everyone wants to complete that nice simple drill. And when you do, you get a buzz because it's challenging, and that's the dopamine hit, and that's the reward center, that's the motivation center, that's what makes you coming back for more. And when you get really good at that, then you just squeeze the size of the targets in. Again, and if you're struggling, you just make them a little bit bigger. It's just being a little bit creative with what you've got.
So just to wrap that up in a bow, like with your tour guys, for example, would you do maybe like 140 to 200 or something like that? Or would you tailor that maybe even if they're struggling in a particular distance? Like, I use either Decade or Gameforge for my stats, and so I can break it down and see, like, okay, last year I was terrible from 120 to 160 or whatever, and I was great at 200. Like, would you even break it down even more and tailor it that way if they've got that data?
Yeah, there's 2 things that you can do. We should always work on our strengths. A lot of people would say just kind of work on weaknesses, but there's a lot of research being done where you should really kind of know your strengths and get even better at your strengths. But definitely looking at some areas where you can improve and focusing in on those. But obviously for the tour players, they get a lot of data these days before a tournament where the kind of usual approach play distances would be. Somewhere like Houston last week. It's a big golf course. It's 7,500 yards. So what we were doing was kind of looking at more towards the top end, kind of 150 to 220, and just doing some extra drills, just an extra run of drills through that kind of distance as well. But again, not everyone has that data or has the need for that kind of data. But yeah, I would always say just work on everything. Work on your strengths, work on your areas that you're good at, but work on your weaknesses as well. The whole point is to prove competence. People always, say, I want more confidence, but in order to build confidence, you have to feel like you're competent. And the only way that you can feel competent is by testing it. So if you struggle between, say, 50 and 100 yards, the little field wedges, you're not confident because you don't feel as though you have the ability or the competence to play those shots. So if you work on them, you check out to see if it's a movement thing. You check out to see if it's a tempo thing. Often when there's areas that players aren't very good at, the first question I'll ask is, how much do you practice it? And honestly, 9 times out of 10 I'll go, not as much as I should. Well, let's change that. A lot of it is state the bleeding obvious, but these are the things that kind of players don't necessarily notice, until they're asked the question. With the kind of 50 to 100 yards, stands to reason if your movement pattern's good, if your technique's decent, And then you practice hitting 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And, you can either measure or guess how close that was to each of those numbers. And with repetition and just working through that drill, you're gonna get better at it, which is proving the competence. And then, the self-confidence kind of starts to increase. When you get out on the golf course, if you end up with a 75-yard shot, you know that you've done the 70 or 80 or the 75 a number of times, and then it just changes your whole mindset, doesn't it? You start talking to yourself in a way that says, well, I've done this quite a bit, on the range, so I've got this, rather than, I know I'm not very good at this distance, and it's totally different mindset, totally different attitude going into the shot.
Yeah, it's definitely a totally different ball game. That's a really interesting way to look at it. I'd like to sit just for a second. I know we've talked a good deal about it, but maybe walk the viewers at home through what a week on tour kind of looks like in prep. I'd imagine a lot of it is what we just mentioned there with the performance drills and all those sort of things. Is there anything else that you're doing, maybe from like a course prepping perspective, or are you having the guys do anything else mentally themselves? And it may be different to each player, but maybe walk us through, what a week on tour prepping looks like for you and throughout the week.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different with each player, but, I do spend quite a bit of time on the practice areas on the Tuesday and Wednesday, kind of going through some of these drills, but we'll also go and kind of break out and go and have a coffee, and just reflect on maybe the previous week, see what was strong, see what could be worked on. Was the patience level there, was the acceptance of the pressure and anxiety that naturally comes along with high performance, and ways to deal with that, more effectively. Was this player getting particularly frustrated and not accepting that, you're in a high pressure environment, and, we don't expect, I don't expect players to go out there and think that they have to be in this kind of Zen-like state in order to play their best golf, because it's just not true. Many players, even yourself, and anyone listening, will know that they've been really nervous on a shot and hit a great golf shot. So it's how you channel your focus, learning to accept that pressure is there, interference is there, but just trying to bring it down a little bit so it doesn't go over the edge into kind of complete chaos and snapping clubs and throwing golf clubs down the fairway. But yeah, just learning to manage those things, but just talking about those kind of things, and even in the evening, if you go for dinner, just chatting about how they can generally improve, knowing where their goals are. I'm not huge on big goals towards like the end of the season. I'd just rather work on the process goals, but just making sure that they're in place, and obviously chatting with the caddies as well. The caddies they're the psychologist and everything else, when they're out there during the tournament, because we're not allowed to communicate with the players, and any kind of coaching whatsoever, you're not allowed to do that. It's against the rules, which is as it should be. So, getting maybe the caddies have a question for me, or, I'll quiz the caddies about, how it's gone. Because a lot of the players will say this. If I say, how's your mindset out on the golf course? A lot of them will say, go and ask my caddy, because you'll get the truth. A lot of them get in denial about how they were out on the golf course.
Get a real objective leap, like, oh yeah, it was great on the course. He's like, yeah, he lost his head like 6 times.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's funny, but the players know that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I think, and maybe you've seen this as well too, but something I've learned about myself under pressure and in those situations, like, I have to hit certain shots certain ways, and it's taking me forever to learn that. Like, let's say for example, I've got like a tight tee shot. Like, I've learned that I have to actually almost overcommit and over decide that I'm just gonna let the thing go, because I spent so many years like trying to guide it down there, and I found that for me, if I just step up and try and smash the thing, 9 times out of 10 it's going to come off like sick, like probably best drive of the day. And I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like an element of this too in the mental side is learning in those situations through failure, unfortunately, what works and what doesn't. I don't know if you've seen a lot of that with your players or if you have like a way to fast track that at all, but for me, like the tee shot, tough tee shot's a perfect example under the gun, maybe trying to win something like that's something I've learned about myself.
Yeah, and it's so common, AJ. Seriously, you're a good player, and you know that when we try and guide a tee shot, it's quite big with the driver, but it can be any shot. Basically, what you're doing is you're trying to avoid hitting a good shot. Sorry, you're trying to avoid hitting a bad shot. So you're in avoidance. Our mindset is either in a towards or pursuit mindset, which is where we're focused on everything that we want to achieve, everything that we want to do with this shot. It's like myself, when I was playing at UNC Charlotte, I was very rarely in a towards or pursuit mindset. I was in avoidance. I'm like, don't hit it in that water, don't hit it in those trees, don't do this, don't do that, don't mess it up. And that was like, it's so complicated and very busy mentally. My brain waves, the amplitude of the brain waves will have been going through the roof. It's almost more luck than judgment being able to hit a good shot. So talking through these things, I often say to players, in those situations, take a leap of faith. Just take a leap of faith. In that situation, you've noticed and your awareness is there that you're in that avoidance mindset where you start thinking, right, I don't want to hit it there, don't hit it. It's like, okay, allow those things to pop in to your head because you can't stop them. But don't really focus on them. Just let them wash through and then go, right, okay, what do I actually want to do with this golf ball? What does a good shot look like? What's my ideal ball flight? And then just go, just take a risk, take a leap of faith and just hit it. And a little something I've done with players in the past is, just pick a target just in front of the ball to line up on. And don't even look down the fairway, because if when you look down the fairway, it scares you and creates anxiety because it might be narrow or there's water and out of bounds down there. Just don't look then, just stand there and smash it over that short target, over that divot that's kind of 3 feet in front of the ball. That can help free people up.
Yeah, that's a really good one to look at it in that way.
It's really simple, but
Yeah, that's good.
it really can work. Also, when we have those anxious feelings and when we feel nervous about a particular tee shot, that's fine. That's why they put ponds and lakes on golf courses and out of bounds. The golf course designers try and mess with your head. Now, again, I'm going to go back to it. If you think that you can't play golf whilst you're anxious, then you've got no chance because it's just part of the human condition. Emotions are there to help us. They're there to guide us and let us know what's happening in our environment. We have to accept them. We have to accept that these are normal feelings. But if you just focus, accept all of that and then hit the shot and then having a little mental pre-shot routine like the short target just gets you back into the present and gets you into that towards mindset or pursuit mindset of, right, what do I actually want to achieve? Well, nice and simply, I want to smash that golf ball over that short target there. That's...
So do you have you mentioned it there, staying present. Do you have, Scott Fawcett was my first ever guest, and one of his really big things is meditation, right? And, I've had Carl Morris on, and we kind of talked about staying present and that thing as well. But do you have many of your players do a mindfulness meditation practice? Is that, a part at all of what you have your players do? How important is that? I've started doing yoga, and it's been sick for that, actually.
Yeah. It's all
And
part
it's
of the
like,
same sphere,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. So,
I've
how
definitely
important is that for you?
pointed. Yeah, I've definitely pointed players towards doing mindfulness, meditations. 100% I have. Not with everyone, but learning how to breathe properly. I'll talk about how to, breathe properly. Rather than breathing from up here, try and lower your breathing into what would be called yogic breathing. It's very grounding. It's very centering. It's very present. So getting to some tour players to download one of the apps off the App Store about mindfulness, like Headspace or Balance or Calm, or there's loads of them out there, and they're really good. They're fantastic. Yeah, definitely have learning that skill, or doing yoga or Pilates or something like that. Learning those skills, learning to manage their physiology, but also the kind of mental arousal, doing some work with that, and then getting them to just transfer it over onto the golf course, because it's like anything, it's a skill. Once the skill is learned, then use it.
So you mentioned on Charlie's podcast, you guys talked about getting into the correct level of arousal. I'd like to talk on that for a little bit. One of the things that I've found is if I'm just playing with my friends, a lot of the times in like a practice round, I just suck. Like, I just don't care. I just can't get bothered. Like, even if I like don't have a tournament on the schedule, I just kind of am like, I don't know, it's different. So, how do you go about, one, maybe finding what that level is for players? Because I think we've all felt it, as if you've played competitive golf, like you felt it at one point or another where you're like, this is my spot. But sometimes it can be difficult to get yourself to it. So I don't know if you have any advice in terms of maybe, one, finding it, but two, like how to repetitively get yourself into it. Because for myself personally, I've been playing this seesaw lately where it's like I get too jacked up sometimes, and then other times I'm like, all right, I need to be like real calm, and then you're just like, you mentioned Matt Wallace, like being flat. So maybe, if you could talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you generally find, that the better the player, the more kind of amped up they need to be within a certain band. I wouldn't say there's a specific sweet spot. It's more there's a band, where if you can stay within that, then you're more likely to feel as though you're in the correct spot. And then obviously if someone's too low, which sometimes happens, you can maybe kick in some little outcome goals, like 2 birdies each 9, 3 birdies each 9, something like that, just to, or do some kind of faster breathing technique just to actually bring them up. A lot of the players in practice rounds, I think it could take 5 hours sometimes, 3 hours, 2.5 hours to play 9 holes practice round on DP or PGA Tour events, and it's boring, because there's sometimes that there might be a 1 ball, behind a 4 ball, and it's just like, and they're not letting them through or whatever. Like yourself, just when you're playing with your friends, there's not enough there to get your juices flowing. But then at the other end, if someone's too amped up, awareness, just noticing the behaviors, getting them to self-reflect on, how they felt. Do they feel as though it impinged on their performance, on their decision making? Every player has been so rattled that they've just, even if they've got a caddy, and they're playing on tour, where they've just pulled a club out of the bag and hit it and then gone, what the hell have I just done that for? And if you end up missing the cut by 1, then, that's crazy, and it's very frustrating. So yeah, just there's no particular way that I do it. It's just by asking them questions. How did they feel as though they were when everything was too amped up? Do they feel as though if they could manage it a little bit better, with some groundedness, doing something simple like, I don't know, getting a tee peg and just really touch it. I'll just use this pencil. So it might be a pencil. It can be anything. If you're too amped up, it means that the brain waves are going too high in amplitude. So if you do something really simple skill, like just as you're walking down the fairway, just really touching the pencil, just really feeling it, just switching your attention totally into that and really focusing on it, because it's such a simple, mundane task. If you're fully into it, then it will bring the amplitude of your brainwaves down, which will obviously in turn calm you down to more into that band where you're more likely to be focused, present and in a towards mindset, which are the flow triggers, the main flow triggers.
Yeah, it's really interesting, this topic, because I think, for myself personally, I almost think I may lean on the side of being too low. Like I probably had 3 tournaments last year where I made 3 or 4 birdies, 5 birdies on the back nine to make a cut on the second day. And you sort of just feel like you're like woomph, like you're just like in it. And I come away from those moments like, well, why couldn't I have played like that? You know, like let's say I don't know, 6 over for first, whatever it is, 27 holes, and they shoot 5 under on the back to make the cut by one or something like that. It's like, what are you like? What are you doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's really interesting to try and like
yeah.
discern that.
The question is, what is your intention before you go out and play? Are you just going out there, pegging it up, and playing those first 27 holes of just going out there to have a game of golf, or do you have an intention of competing? You know, do you have the intention of being somewhere around, you know, kind of top 20 in the mix? Not having like the win goal is quite challenging because it depends on too many other people. But, you know, is your intention to execute your mental pre-shot routine? Is your goal to really accept the frustrations? Is your intention to go out there and, you know, shoot under par, or, you know, depending on skill level, obviously, but, you know, or just get in the mix, get in contention somehow? And it just kind of gives you, especially with good players, I think it just gives them that little bit of zip where they actually end up focusing much better, you know, in order to be able to perform.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So, you know, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I want to be cognizant of your time. Title of the show is What's the Difference? So, you know, we've had a bunch of different guests say different things along the lines of, you know, guys have to have 180 mile an hour ball speed, or guys have to lag putt it well. Guys have to do XYZ mentally. I mean, you know, for you, with all the players that you've worked with, what do you feel like the biggest difference makers are? Let's say, for example, someone who's on Challenge Tour that is then able to break over is, you know, is it a physical skill? Is it a mental? Is it measurable? Is it all different?
I would say one of the biggest things is resilience. You know, it's being able to bounce back from a bad shot. It's being able to bounce back from a bad round. It's being able to bounce back from a bad month. If they've got that, because you can have shorter hitters who still compete. You know, you can have longer hitters who struggle. From a mindset point of view, you know, I would say, you know, the difference is the resilience, having that tenacity to just keep going. You know, you get knocked down, you just get up again and go again. You know, you get knocked down, you get up again and go. Having that ability to do that is, I would say, the difference between someone who gets stuck on the Challenge Tour or the Corn Ferry and then someone who actually progresses further forward. I mean, I could give you like a whole bunch of different stuff, but if you're looking for like the main one through here, from my point of view, it would be resilience.
Yeah, I think that's such a great skill, and I mean, it's applicable to all different facets of life, really, isn't it? I mean, like
any performance environment.
At the end of the day, I mean, resiliency it's kind of the name of the game in every facet, right? Like, you know, even in something like this, or in my, you know, my main job in business and that sort of thing, like resiliency is very important. It's interesting. You're the first person to bring up resiliency, so that's a really interesting one.
Right. The way to build resilience, which is, you know, obviously going to be one of the key things, is accepting that these crazy thoughts are going to pop into your head. You know, accepting that, and then, you know, even through, you know, longer periods of time, knowing that it's just part of the human experience, and accepting that those thoughts or emotions are happening, rather than worrying about, you know, thinking about the negative emotions, and then getting caught in that spiral of, call it ruminating, you know, just those thoughts, getting tied up in those thoughts and getting frustrated by the fact that you're having these emotions. Just accepting them, allow them to wash through, and then in golf, play the next shot. Focus on this shot, because if you're so busy tied up in the emotions and the thoughts, and you're thinking about your thinking too much, we end up not being 100% focused on the shot in front of us, and that's where people get caught out. So big part of resilience is acceptance, but then also the focus side. being focused on the correct things in order to hit a good shot.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible. Lee, this has been great, man. As we're, fully finishing up here, I'd like to just give you opportunity to plug any sort of websites, programs, sponsors, anything like that. If you have anything that you'd like for people to check out, I believe winninggolfmind.com, is that your website, or maybe?
Yeah. Just everything's through there, really. I have some videos. I've got a kind of membership site with a bunch of videos. I did an old one years ago, and then I've just kind of bulked it out a lot over the last couple of years. The feedback I get off it is, and I'm not just saying it, it's really, really strong, really good. Everyone really likes it. It's just simple videos about the ideas and concepts that I work around. It's got practice drills in there. There's even some audios for people to listen to, kind of help you with your putting or put you into that ideal performance state just before you go out and play. So yeah, that's winninggolfmind.com, and obviously if it's just Winning Golf Mind for the usual socials. So I mean, like I said, I originally got into this in order to help players enjoy the game more and reduce frustration. And that's what my membership website is all about. That's what it's for. It's for decent players to help them just enjoy the game more and reduce frustration.
Perfect. All right, man. I appreciate the time. This has been phenomenal. Appreciate you coming out.
Great stuff. Thanks, AJ. Cheers, bud.